We're making these decisions for some specific reasons. We make every decision really with the long-term health of Xbox in mind. And what happens when an industry doesn't grow?
Microsoft cutting almost 2,000 jobs at Activision Blizzard.
But in no way were we alone in that.
Just this week, the video game streaming site Twitch announced 500 job cuts, and software company Unity said it's cutting 1,800, a quarter of its workforce.
And this ambition kind of also drove us to kind of try things that maybe we shouldn't try.
And so I think that just shows you that we got inefficient.
The workers, the people who are actually doing the day-to-day work of developing the games, they are laid off.
I might get the email saying like, no, we no longer need you.
Today's your last day, goodbye.
Not a stable industry wherever you go, whether it's AAA or even in indie spaces.
Boy, do we have a show for you.
Hello and thanks for tuning in. My name is Perry. This is Played Off. It's a video interview series with those affected by the layoffs in the video game industry. Joining me today is Jared Mitchell. Jared, you're a level designer. You've worked with Deck9 and OtherSide. How are you doing?
Pretty okay. I mean, I got interview nerves. I mean, we were literally just talking about that.
Yeah. Again, the deep breathing will settle.
To be expected, yes.
You were working with Deck9 and you were working with OtherSide, two various points, jobs that you were let go from.
The experience of like being unemployed after both of them was kind of like night and day. Because I guess like, when was I laid off from OtherSide? I think that was like June 2019. I remember that much. So I think I was about to turn 25 at that point. I feel kind of sheltered because of that, because that was my first experience with navigating the unemployment system and trying to get benefits and all of that. And that ended up being kind of a nightmare. Yeah, I like checked a box wrong. And for context, I was in the Boston area at that time. And so I was doing like Massachusetts state unemployment insurance. It was like a release of claims or something or other that I marked wrong on my unemployment application. And then they said basically like, well, we have to make like a judgment on this. And I'm like, well, I've turned in all of my stuff. What else can I do to get this moving? And they're just like, well, your employer has to also submit their stuff that's relevant to this. And apparently they never did.
That system is a nightmare.
It really is, and that was my first experience being like, oh, this sucks. Like this is not operating the way it should be. Not to get too far into my past, but my if you grew up in New England, you'd be familiar with this talk show host called Howie Carr, who was just like Boston's Rush Limbaugh basically. And my dad would listen to that all the time in the car while he was driving us around piano lessons or whatever. And I just kept getting this impression of just like, people are like scamming like unemployment and social security and all these things so easily. And then like I have to go through that myself, and I'm just like, oh, that's all bullshit, isn't it? like I would much rather still be employed at this moment.
Right. Man, you got the Limbaugh light. My dad did the same thing, and we were just pure Rush Limbaugh. It was great.
Oh God, yeah,
yeah. Man, it's a system that, yeah, it's true. I think anyone who's looking at these layoffs happening, I saw a tweet. It was right after one of the most recent layoffs. I'm trying to remember. It was the Rooster Teeth one that like just happened. And people were saying, hey, please be considerate because everyone affected is someone who'd rather be at work today. That struck me, just how true it is with what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. To kind of dive back, I jumped very broad, and we'll chalk that up to the interview nerves of hopping live and hitting that beautiful start recording button. But a bit about yourself. Where are you from initially? It sounds like you've kind of traveled around a lot.
Yeah, I grew up in New Hampshire, which is a very nothing state, and yet I kind of hate that as I grow older, I kind of am more sentimental towards it. Don't know why. So yeah, I went to college for a 4-year degree in game design, and then after graduating, I was struggling to find a job in the industry, and I'd actually done QA prior to graduating, actually, because if you remember Vicarious Visions, which I think is technically Blizzard Albany now, they had a relationship with our college, basically, where there were just like a number of people prior to graduating and after graduation that they would just scoop up for their like gigantic QA pits, basically, where you would end up working 66 hours a week for $10 an hour. I did that for 3 months, and between my junior and senior year, and I was basically like, I had this attitude coming out of college, just like, well, I paid my dues, I don't have to do that anymore. And I think that's why it took me like a year and a half, a little over that, to actually get a job post-graduation. And the thing is that it actually lined up perfectly because I really liked OtherSide Entertainment, because I love like System Shock and Deus Ex and games like that. And I saw that so the people who were working on that had formed this new studio, and they had somehow managed to extract it was Night Dive who got the System Shock rights, because they've just put out the remake, which was excellent, but they had a deal with Night Dive where they were just like, make whatever System Shock game you want. And so basically they were like, okay, we're making System Shock 3. And I was like, if there's anywhere where I will put up with that so that I can work my way into design from QA, it would be there. And then they just happened to have an opening at their Massachusetts location. It's technically Concord, West Concord is the stop. Yeah, I drove down there, interviewed, got it, and moved to Boston. And so, yeah.
And that's your time with OtherSide. It sounds like, these kind of immersive System Shock games were kind of what got you into the industry. Was there anything more specific, or was it just a general love for, games?
General love for that specific type of game. Something that I learned pretty quickly is that there's this expectation of genre specialization when you get into the industry. I don't think that used to be the case, but obviously it's getting more and more specific. Of course it has been over the past couple of decades. For whatever reason, in college, I finally got into horror games, and I really loved those. And then I started applying around, and then I started realizing, oh, nobody makes these. Or like the people that make them are like 12-person studios, and they're just like, we're not hiring. It's all like people who got burnt out from like Ubisoft or whatever. Yeah, and then of course I was just like, well, then I should get really obsessed with like Thief and System Shock, right? Because people are making those. No, they're not.
I think Ken Levine for a time was single-handedly holding that kind of genre down with mixed results for the people working underneath them, is what it seems like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh no, like when
not mixed, but just bad.
Yeah. I saw a tweet. This is just going to be half our conversation.
Quoting tweets we've seen.
Yes, exactly. No, literally, when I was at OtherSide and I still had a Twitter, saw a tweet where someone was just like, if you're an indie dev, you have a former BioShock Infinite dev on your team. It's just guaranteed. And I was just like, looking around the office, I was just like, oh, I think we got 3. So yes, they all had stories about that, and I'm like, okay, I'm glad I didn't work on that team.
Yeah. It sounds fun. We'll call it fun and leave it at that.
Sure. Yeah.
So you were with OtherSide and had this frustration happening with your role there, or was it more behind the scenes involvement, rights management with the System Shock identity brand?
Well, I mean, it was all of the above, but we'll take that piece by piece.
Okay.
Actually, prior, I had gotten involved with this game called Albino Lullaby with Justin Pappas. I saw that the game had released its first episode while I was a senior in college, and I was just like, oh, this looks really cool and interesting. And being, in New Hampshire, after graduation, being a fail son at my parents' house, I was just like, well, the closest game dev hub, and I think this was a bad judgment on my part, but I was just like, well, the best game dev hub nearest to me is like Boston, right? I mean, I guess Montreal would be equidistant, but that's, immigration gets involved, and that's a little bit tough.
You got to get a visa.
Yeah, exactly. So, and like they're not gonna hire you unless you're like bilingual as well. So I was just kind of searching around for like local Boston places, and then I happened across Ape Law, and then I was just like, oh, they're the people who did Albino Lullaby. Did they release episode 2 of their game? No, they didn't. Okay, let me just cold email them. Justin got back to me, and he was like, hey, do you want to get involved? I was just like, yeah, sure. And I saw by sheer coincidence, this Justin guy also happened to be at OtherSide Entertainment as well during his day. So I was just like, oh man, this is kind of perfect, because I have someone on the inside, and I'm doing like design work for him on his personal project. So I knew that I had like at least one advocate in the company. And so I joined, and obviously I was trying to do my best job doing QA and all of that, but obviously I was a little impatient, got kind of bored with it. So Justin had actually started slipping me little design tasks, or encouraged me to think about like, oh, well, maybe you could like take a look at this bug, or maybe you could, think of like this feature for the game, or just figure out like new and novel ways that we can get like the overlapping systems to do neat stuff. And so I was doing little bits of that every now and again. When you get into QA, I think that there's sort of a narrative that you're sold about it, which is that like, oh, well, you have to like pay your dues here, and then you get into the job you really want. And obviously I know that the way that QA is talked about and treated is a little contentious on Twitter, and I have some differing feelings about that, having gone through that myself. But we make this game, Underworld Ascendant. We ship it in November of 2018. It is a clunker. My God, it was so technically unstable. It was just... It should not have been put out in that condition. But by sheer coincidence, like Fallout 76 shipped like the week before.
Oh, so you were covered. Everyone's eyes were elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So after that, like we spent a few months like pushing out these major updates, and I started getting more and more of a hand doing design tasks. I actually started designing little systems and little puzzle rooms that were getting added to the game, and it's now sort of in its final state. It's like mediocre, I guess. It's just kind of boring. So yeah, there were like more and more people who were advocating for me, because I like had kind of proven myself on the team. There was a guy named Carl who got brought in, and he was heading up design on the next thing, which is Thick as Thieves, which now that they've announced that, I don't have to worry about that, I guess. And so I was like talking with him all the time, and we really hit it off with each other. And there's also a guy named Matt Davey who was brought in as a programmer. He put in like insane amounts of work on UA. Like genuinely, if it weren't for him, like the thing would have never shipped at all. So whatever you want to say for the game, like, it could have been worse. So yeah, there are a lot of people who are like in my corner, and who were just like, well, we want Jared to be in design for the next project. And I actually started talking with the head of the company, Paul Neurath, and he said, finally, like Matt Davey talked with him, and like he managed to finagle a deal for me, basically. And Paul Neurath said, well, when we port this game to console, we won't have need for QA anymore, so that's when we'll move you up. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. I think it was like a Thursday, if I recall. It was the day that we shipped on PlayStation 4, and I think we'd moved the Xbox ship back 2 weeks. And so there was some confusion about like if this was the day, but I came in to work, walking in just like, oh yeah, I feel like it's happening, it's gonna happen. And then I noticed like we didn't have our usual like 10 a.m. stand up, and I was still looking around being like, wait, what's going on? And then the HR person, she comes over to my desk, and she sounds like somebody had told her someone just died, basically. She's just like, yeah, Jared, you're needed in the conference room. Like,
Oh.
oh, you fuckers. Like, so, we know that we were supposed to promote you today, but we're laying you off instead.
So you were with OtherSide. You're helping launch this game. You're trying to rise the ranks from QA to design. And for clarification's sake, QA, we're talking about
quality assurance.
Quality assurance. Okay. It's a bunch of different acronyms from different industries, but so you're doing QA.
That's fair, yeah.
And when you're looking into doing level design, what does that entail with I guess specifically on OtherSide or with the industry as a whole? There's kind of this idea that games are really hard to make, and they are, absolutely. But a lot of people will look at the work of figuring out how these games are made, decide it is too much, and kind of just stop there. And so there's a lot of people who have an idea of how game design works in their head, but are probably really mistaken. So what does level design, Q&A, what does that all entail?
Well, QA, first off, is bug testing. Obviously, I had a little experience with that at VV, Vicarious Visions. I mean, we called it VV. So basically, in that context, it was just like we came in, and obviously, I was there for a 3-month contract at VV. We had like leads who were already there, who had basically kind of prepped for this sort of sizing up of the QA department. As far as I could tell, in between projects, QA ran on a skeleton crew basically, and then just 6 months prior to launch, they would basically just upsize the department to a really ridiculous scale, and basically the people who had been there the whole time were just we're preparing the structure to take all these people in, so we could just plug people in and basically use brute force everything basically. And so we were given prefabricated test plans, and we were just told here's how you run them, just run them. And so we would play through this Skylanders game for dozens and dozens of hours, basically just testing everything, doing things just like progression sweeps, just making sure you can play through the game, making sure that all of the optional content you can play through as well. You go back and you do the optional content after you made sure the crit path of the game was good. There was this one time where it took multiple testers, including myself, multiple days to do this, but it was because it was the 5th Skylanders game, they wanted to make sure that all of the figurines for this current game and all of the characters in all the prior 4 games all worked. So we just had to one at a time with all of these little RFID chips, plop them down on the little base scanner and be okay, I hit the X button, that is this attack, do we have sound effects, does it do the right damage, do we have VFX, all of that. Okay, I hit the Y button, it does this attack, does it have sound effects, VFX, does the right damage, all of that. And testing out with upgrades. And so something very interesting that I remember from that time is that I think that there's an inaccuracy on that big character sheet. And so I actually tried to fix it, but I couldn't edit the spreadsheet. And so I actually went to this guy who was a senior QA who had helped write this test plan. And I asked him, hey, how do I edit the file itself? It's just why do you want to do that? I'm well, I found a typo. He's just well, show me where it is. Oh, here it is. He's okay. Then I go back to my chair and I'm just testing again, and it comes a few minutes later. He's just thank you for pointing that out, but I'm the one who writes that plan.
Don't touch it.
What in the world is going on here, they got really defensive about it.
Yeah.
And so obviously you can read between the lines. I think, and certainly I felt that desperation at points. I think they were all desperate to be the 1 or 2 people per cycle who got into design, because otherwise, you're out the door again, at the end of the game. You just get your contract terminated. So in the case of OtherSide, it was a lot of that, but it was a very small team. It was myself and one other tester. He was my lead for most of the time, and then I actually pulled in several of my friends from college to act as testers for various amounts of time. But that's where we actually got to like write the test plans and all of that and just go through. And it's really boring of just like, attack this enemy, make sure that they take damage, use this weapon, make sure it deals the right damage, and you literally go through all of them and just brute force. And then eventually, I tried to do some test automation by literally writing scripts in Unity so that I could do some stuff on its own. It could print out stuff to CSVs, so we could just open it in Google Sheets and just analyze the data. Some of that worked, some of it didn't. So yeah, I was getting a little into test automation there. Yeah.
That sounds a lot like I have my background in education in film, and that was very much the grunt path within the film industry too. Like QA seems to parallel PA, production assistant, where you show up on set, you're getting paid the absolute bare minimum day rate. You're a grunt. You have all these higher ups who are telling you do this, do that, and sometimes it's as menial as get coffee, but sometimes it's, hey, this department needs you to run this and do that, where you're kind of trying to vie for a slice of climbing up through the rank. At the same time, there's almost that expectation where you won't be afforded that opportunity because you are the PA, you are the QA, you are kind of the lackey. Is that like a fair comparison to make between the departments? Does it kind of vary by studio or production even? Or am I totally off base and like I should not say lackey?
No, well, a lot of people would like to pretend that QA are not lackeys, because I think that they are aspirationally trying to make sure that QA is on an equal footing with all of the other departments. And I think that's a good goal. That isn't how it is right now. There is absolutely a sort of social stratification between QA and the other departments, and part of my experience at OtherSide was I don't know, it sucked because I had people who were advocating for me, but at the same time they also kind of didn't listen to me about certain things. Trying to remember, I had concerns about trying to remember. I think we had at some point an Underworld sent a main quest, a side quest, and a random goal for the player to accomplish during a mission. And I was thinking to myself, or I said at a meeting at some point, is this kind of too much to throw out the players all at once? Shouldn't we be introducing this gradually, layering it in? Because theoretically any game could be someone's first game. They kind of need to be taught this. A designer in the team, he said, "Oh, they're gamers. They'll get used to it. They play RPGs. They'll get used to it." I'm just I don't think that's a very good idea.
Right.
Solution to this.
Elden Ring, part of this series, was notoriously difficult and has the reputation. They didn't really do this until Elden Ring, to my knowledge. Maybe they had tutorial areas at the start, but even a big game like that has this reputation, you do want to have that kind of tutorialization aspect. You can't just rely on they're gamers, they'll get it kind of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, I think that obviously we're talking about Deus Ex, System Shock, Thief, all of that. I love that stuff in games. I just think that you need to build to that complexity. You need to ease players into that complexity, and then once the whole thing blooms in level 3 or 4, it's awesome.
Yeah, like you said, we have to build to that in order for the player to be able to have the freedom to approach a situation. I can jump from this ledge to that building or that building and make my decision from there. You got to know how to jump.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was difficult because I couldn't separate whether people were kind of not taking me as seriously because I was in QA, or if it was because it was me and a couple of other people who were my age, and then there was a big age gap between the next youngest person. So there's those of us in QA and our social media manager who were all in our early to mid 20s, and then the next youngest person is late 30s. So it was sort of a decade age gap. It kind of felt tough because, I don't know. I'm trying to remember more concrete examples that could outline grievances, but I remember feeling that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was in 2019, so this is 5 years ago-ish. That was a half decade ago. If you don't got concrete examples, that's totally fine. But we can.
Know, man.
move on to so you're at OtherSide and you have meeting where you're told to go into the conference room. You're laid off. What does that conversation itself look like?
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember who all was there. I know it was Paul Neurath, head of the company, Walter, who was sort of our marketing guy and sort of second in command at the company. I think there was a third person in there with me as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who that was. That's eerie to me that I can't remember that anymore. God damn it.
Maybe good though. You've pushed past it. You've moved forward.
Yeah,
but
and,
I guess
and they better pray I don't remember. But yeah, they were just like, hey, sorry, this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to be conciliatory about it, but I was just like in such shock about it, where they're just like, your benefits go to the end of the month. You're getting like 2 weeks of severance or something like that. Paul said, well, we're sorry to see you go. I would be happy to write you a recommendation letter to anywhere you need it. I was just thinking, why the fuck would I want your letter?
Right.
It's tough because, like, in the experience of that, like, if you look at immersive sims, like Paul Neurath is one of the biggest names in the history of that genre. Like, he worked at Origin, he split off to Found Looking Glass, he was there, and he was in charge the whole time, so, like, his name is on Ultima Underworld, Thief, System Shock 1 and 2, although, System Shock 2 was obviously co-developed with Irrational, but it's kind of a big deal. Well, that's the thing. I think I thought it was a big deal that I got to work with him, but over the course of working with him, I was just like, I don't think this guy knows how to run a studio. He kept making some very odd decisions there. And so I basically just like soured on him. Not even like soured, but just in that moment, I was just like so tired. I was just like, I don't need your help here, dude. Kind of forgot until the end, and I felt like kind of a child interjecting at the end. It was just like, oh wait, like I don't have like I have my shitty old like high school graduation present laptop, but I have nothing else to work on or to like update my portfolio. So can I like buy the Alienware laptop that I've been using off of you guys? And they're like, yeah, that sounds okay, but you got to leave it here so we can like wipe the hard drive. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And then I was trying to remember, because they're just like, any like personal files you want to pull off of there, you can do that with a thumb drive. And so there's a moment in the conference room where I was alone. I think I had gone back out, found out that like 3 other people had also gotten laid off that day.
Were they also QA, or were they different departments?
2 of them were QA, and then 1 was actually a designer as well. So yeah, that was kind of it. Oh, and then Justin, who was the designer who I had a working relationship with prior to OtherSide. He was like working from home that day because we got to work from home once a week, and I just like messaged him on Slack. I'm just like, dude, they just laid me off. He's just like, I'm coming over. And then he and I drove back into Boston. I just started getting him into King Crimson, so we listened to King Crimson all the way there, and then we, because my apartment was near Porter Square, we more or less just did a bar crawl.
Good.
We got way too drunk.
That's as good a way to spend the rest of that day as any. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But I will say, I think I came back to my apartment at like 4 or 5 in the afternoon or something like that, and I was just like spinning drunk, passed out on my bed, and then I like woke up like at a normal time the next morning with no hangover.
That's incredible. That's fate doing you a solid there.
I know, the universe is saying, go with God, like do your own thing now, man. It's just like, okay, so
because you have this awesome bar crawl and you wake up with no hangover, and that's perfect. When does the next steps start to come in? You're navigating this god-awful unemployment system. What is next for Jared Mitchell?
Some people had been, like I said, helping me out. There was the project lead, I think. His name's Joe Fielder. He was writing on BioShock Infinite, and he's since gone on to do a lot of amazing things. He's at Obsidian right now. He pushed to get me like an associate design or assistant design credit once we shipped our second post-launch update to Underworld Descendant. And so I was trying desperately to like use that as like leverage to be like, well, I'm not going back to QA because I know that ascendancy, no pun intended given Underworld Descendant, but that moving up is kind of a myth. I was just like, well, I can't go back to that. I can't like put in another like year and a half or 2 years to get burnt again and do this song and dance again. So I was pretty adamant about like, I want to get into design. I want a design role. And to be fair, I was like hanging out with people in the Boston scene during this time, you know, grabbing a beer with people. And even during interviews, like I would tell the story about my layoff, and you know, I developed a sense of humor about it pretty quickly. I kind of always felt like I was telling the way I told it. It was like, you know, the aristocrats. So you know, just like got laid off the same day. So, but the response that I kept getting from a lot of people is just like, oh yeah, that happened to me, or like, oh yeah, I know a guy that happened to. They pulled the rug out from him. I'm just like, how common is this occurrence? And it was really terrifying to me. So that really steeled my resolve for like, no, design or nothing, basically. I was not smart, and I basically didn't like update my portfolio with materials already prior to getting laid off. I all of a sudden had no access to the game files, and I couldn't do any of that. I was communicating with that programmer, Matt Davey, because, you know, obviously he felt really bad for me. And I was just like, dude, you got to help me. I need like this asset, this asset, this asset. And fortunately, he talked with the higher ups, and he was able to get me all the materials I needed so I could actually like put on my portfolio site, like, I shipped a game, here's some actual design work that I did for that game. Let's talk about it. And so obviously that was a big leg up, but very slowly, you know, I was dealing with this holdup in unemployment funds coming my way. And I saved up a little bit of money, but not a lot. And so it was, I think, almost 2.5 months, I just wasn't getting any money at all. And I happened to talk with the right person about it. I was just complaining, like, yeah, they've been holding my money. I haven't been getting any of that. And he was just like, you should call your representative, because like they handle stuff like that all the time. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. So I called up, it was actually Ayanna Presley's office, coincidentally. I called them up. I was just like, hey, this is what's going on. And they're like, yeah, okay, sure, we'll get it back to you. And I swear to God, I think I might be making this up. I think it was on a Monday, and then it was like by Friday they got me. Like, they sent me an email being like, it's resolved.
Wow.
Really? Like this whole hang up, this whole goddamn time, because I was literally at the end of my rope financially. I didn't have any. Yeah, it came in just in the nick of time.
That gives me faith for the state of contacting your representative. My big experience with that is living in Montana and having the great Steve Daines to try and figure all that out. It's not a perfect system, but I'm glad to hear it worked out for you there.
I'm not sure faith in our representatives is the moral I'm trying to impart here.
No, and it shouldn't be. But I'm happy that the system. I'm happy the system worked as it should always work and never does in your situation there.
Yeah, exactly. Not to get too bleak as well, although this is kind of funny. I started paying attention all of a sudden to all of those ads where they're just like, hey, if you donate a certain amount of blood, we'll pay you for it. So I did actually go down to a place in Quincy on the Red Line to do that, and they said, well, basically we have to like test you with this first batch, and then once you're clean, we can bring you back in, and then we'll start paying you for all of these things. And they literally have like a pamphlet with like a menu almost of just like, well, if you let us do this, we will pay you this amount, and here's how frequently you can do that. And of course the bastards never called me back, so I basically gave my blood away for free.
Well, and you said not to be bleak, and maybe that is a little bleak, but I don't think it's something to write off. I mean, you certainly are not the only one who's been in that spot where it's like, what can I do? What can I do to make money? What can I sell? I've got this. It's inside me. I can sell that and make money. You're absolutely not the only person who's been in that spot in their life.
No, absolutely. And I've listened to some podcasts and reporting about like the plasma industry as a whole getting real big recently. Go figure. It took a while for me to sort that out, but of course this whole time as well. One of the frustrating things as well, to get money, you have to prove that you're searching for a job. And so Massachusetts was mandating that I had to do like 3 job search activities a week, which to be fair, was a good thing for me to like keep on a schedule like that. Because Lord knows when I was at my parents' house, I was kind of more lackadaisical about that. But also, searching for like junior design jobs. I mean, there's barely any junior openings at all in the industry, let alone for designers. So I kept applying around, and even though I wasn't getting my money, I was still required to do the job search log, which
did you get back pay for all the time that you were in this limbo?
Yeah, they did that at least. So, I got a pretty big lump sum with like a couple $1,000 when that finally came through. I was just like, okay, thank God. So all this time I'm like applying to jobs, basically. You got to test every now and again, like that comes through. You're scrambling for that. To get that done. One of the sort of weird brainworms going around the industry, let's say, is that there's this expectation that you have to know a studio's output and you have to have like played all of their games, basically, if you're applying to them. And the difficult thing about that is that, when you're searching for a job in the game industry, like the strategy right now, obviously, is just like, like for every design opening, there's like 500-600 applicants. So just assuming like a perfectly even chance of you getting hired as compared to anyone else, which is not necessarily true because some people don't know how to put portfolio together or do a resume properly.
Right.
No shame to them, but assuming that like your chances are 1 in 500 because of 500 applicants, that means that on average you're gonna have to apply to 500 different places. I think it took me anywhere from 80 to 100 places that I applied to in order to get a job after getting laid off from OtherSide. But that's also like 80 studios whose backlogs you have to be familiar with. And that's an insane number for anybody to play and be familiar with. And so I remember one time I actually got a design test from Bungie. I remember downloading a ripped copy of like the first Halo and just playing through that real quick because I had never played, I'd only played like multiplayer Halo and got really frustrated because my friends would always beat me and I was suck at it. So I played through that real quick, and then I happened to text like a friend of mine who ended up at Bungie. I was just like, hey man, I just got this design test. And he was just like, have you played Destiny? I'm like, no. He's like, you need to play Destiny. And so this was prior to Destiny being free. So he got me a free copy with some of the DLC. It was just like, okay, thank you. Obviously I didn't get that job. So I'm not sure what that was worth, but I can say I've played Destiny 2 now.
All right.
So, and interestingly, there's an interview that I got flown out for with ZeniMax Online, which I was very surprised by the description of the position. They were looking for an intermediate person at the very least, and I was not there. Somehow they decided, like, yeah, spend the plane ticket on him. Like, okay. So there were several places that I got tests, but they were really intermittent. They would come every month and a half maybe, and in between then it's just like, okay, I do my 3 job apps and then I'm just like sitting around. I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to be doing, right?
Just to somebody out there, I'm sure they're taking the, oh, boo-hoo, Jared got to play video games as kind of like a prep for a job interview where he's going to make them. But when you're doing it like that, it's not really the enjoyment side of it. You're doing that as almost like a syllabus before you can even apply to a place because you want to be familiar. So you're not like playing Halo for the sake of playing Halo necessary. You're playing it so that you have a leg up to be able to apply at Bungie. It's not all fun and games.
Yeah, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, it's just firsthand experience. But I remember some of my parents, like friends and like older people from like the neighborhood I grew up in, always joking with me, just like, oh yeah, you're getting paid to play video games. That was a bad New Hampshire accent. That was more Canadian. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
And the thing is that they don't really understand. Like again, like you're just in the case of QA, you're just going through spreadsheets and playing this thing. That is the thing that sucks the fun out of anything. It literally is just a job when you're doing that sort of thing. In the context of playing games to like prep for a job, it's a little closer to a real player experience. But obviously, you know, I'm still taking notes on systems and being like, okay, this is an interesting level. You know, they introduced this thing. How do they develop this idea? How does it work with the existing systems? All of that. So yeah, obviously there's still a bit of like diligence that you have to do while you're doing this. So yeah, it's work.
Doing freelance writing as I'm currently doing, I'm seeing a lot of communication from people in that space about like February of just this last year seemed god awful because you had Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, you had Yakuza, you had Persona 3, these massive 100-hour RPGs that you've same thing you're taking notes on.
Yeah, when I was still with my parents prior to OtherSide, I did do an interview with this company called Servios. Was telling them, I happen to be like playing like Deus Ex this time, and then I've moved on to Invisible War as part of the interview because they just asked, hey, what you playing? And they're just like, okay, cool. So like, tell us what's one thing that you would change about the original Deus Ex that doesn't work for you. I was just like, I know I had this. I know I internalized this at some point. I was just like, this is kind of a fail or a shortcoming of the systems in Deus Ex, but I just could not remember it on the spot. So I just went, the boss fights aren't good. It's just like everybody's So I completely fucking whiffed it. So like, yeah, you absolutely need to prep that stuff on hand. For the curious, it was the level loading between level hubs or hub levels. And the way that the AI does not interact very well with that, if you're curious. Yeah.
So you're going through these prep stages, you're going through interviews, managing the unemployment system. Eventually, you land at Deck 9.
I was graduating with other people who got in the industry. And so one of my friends who I graduated with, he just posted like, hey, we're looking for like, an entry-level design position here, let me know if you apply. And I was just like, oh fuck, this could be really good. And so we did the interview. We actually did a phone screener between us, and then we did like a video interview. It was me, Jeremiah, the other level designer there, Alex, and then a producer. Very interestingly, they had me basically do like a live level design test, basically, where Jeremiah was just running around a very basic level he did in Unreal. And he was just like, hey, what's this? Design an objective. Where would you put this? Is there anything you would change about this layout? I'm just like, So I answered all of that. Eventually I got the call, or I got the email from Jeff Litchford from Deck 9. He's like the COO, if I recall. And he's just like, hey, yeah, we want you. Here's a contract, basically. So it's like, cool.
You're at Deck 9, and you are doing level design at this point? Were you hired as level design, or?
I was hired as level design. Okay. That's right. I didn't answer half of your question earlier.
No, it's okay.
I'm too nervous, and I'm just sputtering.
No, it's okay. We'll do some preps, and we'll rein it in.
I described to you what QA is like. I didn't describe to you what level design is like. And the answer is that I'm trying to figure out what the fuck level design is. Because in college, incidentally, I had a guy as a professor named John Boyd, and he happened to get into the industry in the early 2000s when there was still sort of an Unreal Tournament Quake 3 kind of vibe going on, and he was at like Terminal Reality Ritual, and then he actually ended up at id on Rage, and then apparently they also had some fuckery around layoffs, and he just was like, well, fuck this, and left voluntarily, and then ended up teaching. He taught us to design levels using Half-Life 2, oddly enough. And the interesting thing is that the way that he was presenting designing levels was from his experience, where he's just like, you're gonna have like some support from an artist, you may have some support from a programmer, but everything else is basically just you. You own the concept, you may be given a narrative prompt, but how you play the beats out in your level is largely your jurisdiction. You're in charge of placing props, you're in charge of decorating, you're in charge of doing like in-level scripting where you don't need programming assistance to make sure that all of the events in there are working properly. It was a very soup to nuts presentation of what level design was. And that kind of was how things were at OtherSide, at least from what I saw Justin doing. But the thing is that that company is also very small. When you start interviewing around at different places, they all have different ideas of what a level designer does, and the responsibilities of the level designer will grow or shrink depending on the way that they do things. And so when I got to Deck 9, I had a very rude awakening. Let's say that. In that, environment art was very controlling over everything. I worked on Life is Strange True Colors, to be clear, and I came in at about the time when most of the initial content had been implemented. So there wasn't really a lot for me to do on the level design side. So they were basically just having me do like supportive work and doing just like a lot of like grunt work so that the other guys could focus on like getting the last few scenes implemented and in the editor and all of that. And then of course we would split the polish workload among all those scenes. I kind of came into this position being told, we have most everything designed. You're not going to like design a level on the base game. You're here to help us out. But when we get to the DLC, you'll be given way more control and way more freedom. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. I can make that bargain. Solving tons and tons of bugs, well, not even like tons of bugs, but just like Square Enix really wanted True Colors to be as bug-free as possible, basically. Any publisher would want to like keep and maintain a reputation of their games being, very technically solid. And let me tell you, after Underworld Ascendant, I was perfectly happy to do that. I think I literally said to myself at some point, like, after OtherSide, I'm happy working on something competent and boring. And I got that. We kept solving just little bugs that kept coming in, but it was like taking a long while. And I don't know if people know this about the industry, but the publishers kind of have their own in-house devs and staff. Like they have basically like a designer as a sort of representative to basically talk with the designers on all the external teams to be like, okay, so this is what you're thinking, this is what you're proposing, to also offer suggestions and guidance. Apparently Square's in-house designer was getting really nervous because we were supposed to have the DLC designed already by that point, and we were just like, well, we're stuck solving these bugs, and that's mandated by Square, so our hands are tied. We don't have the time to do this, basically. The way it was told to me initially, the Square in-house designer basically plopped down the design docs for the DLC. It was just like, okay, just make this. I was apparently wrong about that because I remember running my mouth about that in a meeting one time, and it was actually the non-level, I guess you'd call them systems designers, who had been on the team, who had apparently like got pulled into a room with this Square designer, and we're just like, okay, we got to figure this out. They were involved in that, and I was just complaining one time in a meeting, just putting my foot in my mouth, just being like, oh, they don't even let us design fucking levels here. Like, Square, just dictated to us this whole thing, and they're just like, we helped with that. Like, great. So but the point was still that, like, and of course I messaged them afterwards. I'm just like, I'm so sorry, I didn't know that.
Growing pains.
Yeah, the point is that they were just like, I was told, well, on the DLC you'll get to design a level, and then I didn't get to design a level. I did have more ownership. Like, I did scene imports, which is basically like we were converting it from this sort of script writing software that we have called Playwright, and bringing it into our proprietary tool called Storyteller, and then getting that hooked up with a scene in Unreal 4 at the time. So I had more ownership over that, but I was just like, man, I'm not getting to do anything. And then, again, I was being told, well, sorry, it didn't pan out for the DLC, but on the next game that you work on, you'll get to make levels. You'll finally get to make levels. When I'm being particularly glib, I will say I worked as a level designer at Deck 9 for almost 3.5 years, and I never designed a level.
Jeez. So that whole time is just that supplemental work. Is that what you're doing then there?
Yeah, a lot of that, yeah. The level designers that I had been working with when I was first there, both of them left, and then like completely new level designers came in, and I talked with them, and everybody that I talked with who had come in after me eventually got to my stance, where they were just like, this is not a level design job. If they had called it technical design, that would have set expectations appropriately, I think. Yeah, in terms of just like, actually, and I was hearing, from the guys that I worked with when I first got there about how little say they had actually had in True Colors over the levels as well. Like, environment art was very adamant about like designing the environments the way that they wanted them. They had very little say about like the plot or just like the actual puzzles or events that happened during a level. It was basically just implementing other people's work. And I have to say I resonated with that description quite a bit.
That's rough. What kept you for those 3.5 years then? Was it the hope of being kind of the carrot on a stick of you'll get to do it on the DLC, you'll get to do it on the next game? Were you just itching for that chance? What was happening there?
Gosh, that's a very good question. There had certainly been periods of time that were worse than others at that studio. But there were definitely times where I was absolutely looking for the exit. Again, I just kept applying here and there. I got like a design test from like Sucker Punch, which I thought was really cool. But obviously that didn't go anywhere. And there had been periods of time where it was just like, Jesus Christ, I can't take this anymore. But then there were points where I had a particular lead for literally like 3 months, and she was horrible. Not even because she was like belligerent or anything, but because like she absolutely did not advocate for design at all, and I kept getting no answers and like no support from her. And that was a point where I was just like, okay, I gotta get the hell out of here. But then she got fired, I believe, and coincidentally that's like when they had hired a new lead level designer like the exact same day. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm still applying around. And then things just immediately got better, basically. Like I didn't have to deal with her, and like I finally had a lead who was like helping me. I should say the initial lead, Jeremiah, he had left to go to Bungie initially, incidentally. And then there was a 3-month interim where I had this lead, and she was awful, and then she got canned, and I had a new lead level designer. There's a certain point in your career, I guess, where people start coming to you. And indeed, that's how I got my current job, which is really nice because I didn't need to put as much effort in. And so fortunately, I didn't really see the sort of influx of like LinkedIn messages like immediately after we shipped True Colors, but like they started trickling in every now and again. And so I was still like kind of passively taking interviews that whole time. I think the biggest thing I wanted was that like I knew that I was getting severely underpaid at that place. Post OtherSide, the whole search for a job took about 8 months, which, I was, again, just at the end of my financial rope. I did end up having to like borrow money from some friends, which I was very lucky. I paid them back. Yeah, I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And again, that, just like the unemployment money coming in, that job offer just came in the nick of time. They had initially offered me like $45,000. That was what I was getting paid at the end of OtherSide as a person in QA. And I was just like, could I at least get $50,000? And they were just like, well, no, but we'll give you a bigger like signing bonus. I was just like, yeah, okay, fine. And of course I used that signing bonus completely in the move from Boston to Denver.
Were those, they give you like a reallocation fund?
I think that's sort of the implied use of it.
Gotcha.
Of the signing bonus. But of course then I was just stuck with, a $45,000 salary. They had their annual reviews like 3 months after I joined, and so they're just like, you've been here for too little time for us to like give you a raise. I was
so you had to wait 15 months.
Yeah, basically. And then they got, and the next raise I got was just like, oh, you're up to $50K. Like, ooh, thanks.
An extra 5K. That's great.
Yeah, and so eventually it just came to. I waited another year. I got a bump to 56, and I was just thinking to myself, they just don't get it. Because I was talking with my friends in the industry, and even with like other people at Deck 9, they were all just like, yeah, I'm getting paid so little here, like it's really bad. And I was talking with them, and so I was like, well, how much are you getting? They're like, yeah, I'm getting like 80K. I'm like, I'm getting like 45, and they would usually spit out their drink when they heard that. They're just like, they're paying you what? And I did find, especially producers who are getting paid even lower, like
lower than the
40K.
45. Oh,
yeah,
as a producer.
Yeah. So clearly that was an endemic situation there. And I was also talking with like friends, designer friends at other places, and they're just like, you should be making like 90K. And I was like, really, man? You know, I have a friend, Colin, and he was doing QA at a place in Texas, and he was getting like 85, 90 at the end of his QA stuff before he moved to design.
And what were you making at QA? You had said like, what, 60 something? This was an hour ago, but...
No, in QA, at Vicarious Visions, it was like $10 an hour. At OtherSide, I started hourly, and it was like 12.
Wow, that's not 85K.
Like no,
it's definitely not 85K.
Yeah, and I got some like hourly raises while I was there, and then they converted me to full time for 7 months or whatever the hell. And by that time I was getting 45K. And then I started at Deck 9 at 45K, even though I'm in design, which is supposed to be, well, not supposed to be. It generally is at this point in time paid higher than QA. But I didn't see that, obviously. And so eventually, you know, it came to this point where I was just like, look, you guys have to like adjust my salary here because you're not paying me what I'm worth. And they looked over my annual review and they just said, oh yeah, well, you know, it just says like you're doing an okay job, so we're not going to do that. And then they pulled out this like rubric of design job titles at the company that I had never seen, which apparently had been defined by that awful lead that I had for 3 months. Like she wrote it while she was there and never showed it to anyone else, apparently. But, you know, I was talking with my level design lead and a producer there, and we were looking at this, and they were just like, I'm doing everything a person with, like, the next title up. So why don't we pitch it as a promotion instead? And that's the only reason I got to, like, a decent salary of, like, 70K. But that only kicked in, like, 6 or 7 months before I got laid off at Deck 9 anyways. So it's not like it really amounted to something. Yeah, not to gripe about it too much, but like I just did my taxes at the end of this year. I was comparing like my adjusted gross income between the past 2 years, and like despite getting a salary increase at Deck 9 and now getting paid even more at my new job, I basically made the same amount of money, which was around 52K. And so I was just like, well, on paper, I'm getting this amount of money. But in practice, I'm getting nowhere near that amount.
The number's bigger on that sheet of paper, so I'm doing better, right?
I know, right? Yeah.
Oh, man. So
yeah.
You get that increase, you said, around 6-7 months with your tenure left, so that's what, end of 2022-ish? And then it was
around there.
May of 2023 at Deck 9, and what's going on in May?
Yeah, so the Expanse had been wrapping up, and Deck 9 was trying to get a third project going. Regrettably, that had a lot of fits and starts, and it ended up getting canceled pretty abruptly, from what I understand, because the publisher that we were working with they were just like, we're like in the red here. We can't finance this thing anymore. They were talking about the situation that the studio heads were they do a monthly all hands, and they were just like, hey, so, you may have heard about this situation. That's true. We want everyone to hang tight. We're trying to get a project together as soon as possible with like another publisher. We have people who are like banged at our door trying to do stuff with us. we hope to get something new lined up really soon. Basically, the message was just like, nobody panic. Right? And they were just like, well, we'll do like weekly updates to keep everybody abreast of this. And then I think they did one. And they did another, and they were just like, yeah, sorry, everybody. We have to do a layoff. Sorry about that. It's over the prior 2 weeks, they had moved people off the canceled project onto our teams. I think that the impression that I had gotten was like, oh, well, obviously the people who are on the canceled project are going to be the ones that they're going to cut first, right? Because, you know, I had been working on the game I had been working on for a couple of years at that point. You know, I had like ownership of a number of scenes and a number of features. And we were still developing a number of things, and I was actively working together with some people. During that last meeting, they were just like, the way we're going to do this is that we're going to hang up this Zoom call, and if you get an email invitation in like the next 5 minutes, then you've been affected by the layoff, which I was just like, that seems like a very weird way of handling this. And so, again, arrogant me, I thought to myself, yeah, well, that sucks to them, but like I've been on this project for like 2-ish years, so I'm all good, right? So I can just kick my feet back up and take a big sip of water, and then I heard the Outlook ding. I'm like, fuck.
Well, even still, I imagine there was some amount of, I guess, anxiety or the what if game. Like you're thinking that you're pretty secure, but is there a moment or a timer in your head that's going over those next 5 minutes with that sense of potential dread?
It was interesting because we had layoffs while I was there, and I'd survived all of them prior. So like we had a couple of them at the beginning of 2021, if I recall correctly, and I think it was not done very well, but they were like 2 in a row where it was like a dozen people each, I think. It was funny because there were a lot of, and I have to stay vague here, but part of our frustrations with being in level design was, again, a lack of responsibilities that we were given in order to actually do what we thought our job was. But that also stemmed a lot from poor communication with other departments and, frankly, not on our end. Because we were getting stonewalled quite a bit. And so there were points where I was a little worried because people were talking about how, you know, I had a couple of different coworkers, and this was kind of shitty behavior on their part, but they were just kind of like whispering every now and again, just like, you know, people are upset with you, like they feel like you're not pulling your weight and all that. And I had found out after the fact that, you know, indeed some people were really gunning for me to let me go, and that didn't end up happening. I was more worried about like getting fired than I was the layoffs, but I did have this sort of irrational panic every now and again when when my lead was just like, hey, you know, let's get on a Zoom call and talk about something. I'm just like, oh God, is this it?
There's no greater way to strike fear into someone than just being like, hey, do you have a minute to talk? Can you swing by my office at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that kind of was there. And then, again, I just hubristically, is that the word?
We'll take it.
Yeah. Thought like, oh, I'm not going to get hit by this layoff. And then I got hit by the layoff. And I was like, well, I suppose that makes for a funnier story.
It's a good attitude, if nothing else. But this is...
Yeah, exactly.
Your second layoff in
4
years at that point. I mean, what are you feeling? What's the state of, like, do I even want to work in this industry anymore? Is this what it's like?
Like I said, and I think the very first answer that I gave to a question, I did not expound fully on that either.
It's fine. That's what the now is for.
Like I mentioned, between OtherSide and Deck 9, that job search was 8 months, and I talked with people, and a lot of people were like, yeah, that's kind of like abnormal. Although I'm now talking with people that were also let go from Deck 9, and some of them are still looking for work today, which is terrifying to me, and it's been like, 10 months.
That is the same layoff you were a part of in May? Because Deck 9 also did a layoff a couple
Yeah,
weeks
like a
ago.
couple of weeks ago,
with
yeah.
like 20% of its workforce. It's
Yeah.
yeah. But people from May, almost a year ago, are still looking for work.
Yes. Absolutely. So I had been worried between OtherSide and Deck9. That was like an 8-month search, and I barely made it through, like by the skin of my teeth. And I was just thinking to myself, Jesus Christ, how long is this one going to last? Now, obviously, I had another shipped title under my belt and explicitly as a level designer now, not just like QA with like this, the additional design credit.
Right.
So I felt like, a proper level designer at this point.
Right.
And fortunately, I started getting a lot more messages this time around. I basically got an offer a little over 2 months after getting laid off, which was way more manageable. I knew how to ask all the right questions to make sure I didn't fuck up my unemployment money this time around. So that was also smooth. So I guess I learned from experience. So this time was just like way easier. But of course, there's always just the suspense in the moment of just like, oh, well, is anybody going to offer this to me? And you just don't know until you get the offer, of course. I was definitely more worried about like, is this going to be like another 8-month thing? And again, like a lot of my coworkers former coworkers are still out of work. So it very well could have been, regrettably. That's the biggest thing that was running through my head of just like, how fucking long is this going to take?
Thankfully, it was that shorter amount of time, but
yeah,
was it more amplified? It was a shorter turnaround time between being laid off and getting the new position, but was that kind of fear amplified by seeing just how abundant the layoffs were in 2023? Because in May, I want to say most of the layoffs hit around quarter 3, quarter 4, the later part of 2023, for sure. But so you're not quite there yet. You're maybe not feeling that dread?
At that point, no. I think I actually got quite lucky in that regard, in that our layoff was earlier in the year before this sort of narrative started building of like, this is like the year of layoffs for game devs. And obviously that's kind of cute in hindsight given 2024 so far.
Given this year, shouldn't laugh. It's endemic. But
no, absolutely.
You almost kind of have to, because it's insane.
No, absolutely. It hadn't entered into my mind, this narrative of just like, everybody's getting laid off, everybody's out of work, the industry is collapsing or whatever. It isn't really, obviously, but this idea of just like so many people out of work, I think that really started to develop even just after I started my new job. And I was just, thinking to myself, I feel so lucky, and I feel very undeserving of that luck. It's sort of a survivor's guilt. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Again, survivor's guilt is pretty appropriate because you are watching something, crumble around you. There's security, but that's got to be a hard thing to grapple with.
Definitely, especially because I felt like, I don't know, how should I put this? Do I quote Pedagogy of the Oppressed for like the millionth time in my life? If you've ever read Paulo Freire, he goes into this, like he's examining like the dynamics of like teacher-student stuff, but obviously I think it's pretty widely applicable. And he talks about teachers being like the source of all knowledge, and like the students being, empty of knowledge, or at least that's sort of how teaching is set up currently. And there is this sort of impression that students, or people who are in the lower position in a sort of power dynamic, get about themselves, that they are just inherently inferior to the person who's in power in the power dynamic. And saying that, Freire says, self-deprecation is the language of the oppressed. And that is something that has really stuck with me for a while because, obviously I'm sure there's many examples in this interview so far, but like I do some self-deprecating humor every now and again. You know what it is?
Yeah.
But the difficult thing about it is like feeling like Deck9 was not a very conducive environment for me to grow in my craft. And now I am in a pretty good environment working on my craft, and it's kind of amazing to me just the little things that people say. I'm just like, hey man, this is a really good like little chunk of level, like that's really neat. Or like, hey, I like that thing you scripted. I'm just like, oh my god, I'm confident. Like with all that said, I know I need to like let that go a little bit, because obviously I want everybody that I worked with who was affected by this to like gain some financial stability and get back into the industry and do what they love and not have to work at incompetent studios anymore.
Right.
I still get this feeling of just like, oh, well, that person at Deck Nine, they're working harder than me. I don't deserve to have gotten this when they're still looking. And it's very difficult because I know that that's kind of a logical fallacy in there. Just like, it's difficult to compare because, obviously I have different amounts of experience compared to other people, and also we're in different disciplines and all of that. But I just can't shake that feeling at points of just like, why do I get to be so fortunate?
You can call it, survivor's guilt, the imposter syndrome, any of those kind of
oh yeah,
not debilitating, you just said it, depreciative humor type of inlines, but it doesn't negate the fact that those can be challenging feelings, and I'm sure you're not the only one who's grappling with that. I mean, any game dev looking at, almost in the past half year, almost 20,000 people laid off, thereabouts. It can be hard to kind of grapple with that. Survivor's guilt is pretty apt. Speaking of, the grander situation, what, in your opinion, is happening? Why are these mass layoffs occurring?
That's kind of tough because
it's a big question.
We've all got a worm's eye view of what the hell is happening in the economy. We're all groping the elephant, as I believe that proverb, that little story went. My point is that we, not to be a stereotypical nerd, the economy is kind of like Cthulhu, in that you can only get extremely small glimpses of it, and if you look at it too much, you go mad.
And depending on that small view, it's going to change what you're feeling. There's discrepancies depending on what sectors you're looking at.
It's kind of interesting to me because I think that there was a lot of... I kept trying to attribute the failures of Deck Nine and the layoffs at Deck Nine to things that were very uniquely Deck Nine, because I thought that there was a lot of mismanagement. I think people may have caught a glimpse of it as I was describing it, but I think I went through like 4 or 5 different lead designers during my time there. And, again, that was like 3 years and 3 months, something like that. So I'm averaging, more than 1 lead a year, which was absolutely ridiculous. And that, I think, spoke to a lot of bigger problems at the studio. And I thought that, obviously, like the low pay, obviously the project mismanagement that was going on, the department mismanagement, or personnel mismanagement, I guess you could say. I kept attributing that to the specific guys at the top of the studio. But I also think that this sort of crisis may speak to that actually being more universal than we had previously thought. For example, when I was back at OtherSide, or when I was still first getting into immersive sims, I kept hearing this thing, and this was repeated on the team at OtherSide Entertainment, of like, well, immersive sims are really complex games. They always come together at the last minute. And then there's that expose while I was there about the conditions at BioWare. And they said something along the lines of, BioWare magic, which is to say all the games are a gigantic mess until the last minute, and then they become really great. And the thing is that this was usually used as a pretense to get people to crunch. And so the thing that really stuck with me is that, like, I thought that this, like, saying about the game that I was working on was unique to this genre, was unique to this lineage of game. But then I find out that they're saying this at BioWare as well. I think that, regrettably, our certain problems with like mismanagement, certain problems with not paying people enough, certain problems with just like wasting a bunch of like person hours on particular things or goofy pursuits when they could just be making like a solid game. They are more common than we would like to think. And I think that kind of sucks. Obviously, people have been talking about more macroeconomic stuff of like, Biden has had to do a lot of things to drive down inflation by like raising interest rates on loans that were being given out during COVID. I do not know enough about economics to speak to that, obviously. Right. I think very few people in the world know exactly how to speak to that, and of those few people who know exactly why that's happening, what's going on, most of them are just like, yeah, well, this is good, and I'm just like, I don't want to listen to you. So like,
to you as a normal person, the economy seems like it's in the shitter, but actually, if you listen to me, the economy is doing actually really good.
Yeah, Jesus. The number of times I've heard like the explainers for inflation were just like, well, people were too frivolous with the COVID checks they got. I was just like, shut up. Like, I don't want to hear that. Like,
too frivolous with the $2,000 max that they got to last them the span of 4+ years, because it's still going on. We're still dealing with COVID.
Yeah, literally, I think almost all of that I either put towards like car payments or like rent. I literally used up like the last $1,400 one because I had a short-term lease at a pricier place,
right?
And like all of that went to rent. Is that frivolous?
I mean, so many people, that money was gone the second it hit their account, because you had things in bigger metropolitan areas like these rent freezes, but that didn't change the fact that that was less a rent freeze and more like an eviction freeze. You were still expected to pay this. And so like by the time you get the check that you've been told you're going to get, it's months after the fact. So frivolous. Yeah, it's the right word for it, apparently.
Absolutely. Yeah, regrettably, I don't feel like I have a better, wider systemic perspective on like why this is happening now in particular, and why it's so drastic this time around. I don't know. It just sucks.
There doesn't have to be one answer or the right answer. It doesn't change the fact that it just sucks. Is the human element of it, nothing. No answer or reason or explanation from a company, any of that is going to change the fact that, again, in the past half year, we've seen almost 20,000 jobs, 20,000 people's livelihoods just completely turned upside down. And I don't think any answer is satisfactory to explain that away.
No, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I know two separate people who in the past year have gotten laid off twice.
Wow.
Two separate people who have been through this twice.
And I'm sure
it's bad, man.
Because I've seen people, on Twitter who have shared that sentiment and said like, it is shocking to see that. I'm sure the two people I've seen, or 2+ people, however many people I've seen, I'm sure they're not the same people that you've seen who have been hit twice. And what does that do to someone when you're like, okay, maybe this just wasn't a great fit, or maybe this company was mismanaged, to go to another one and have that exact same thing happen? Like you were kind of saying earlier, it's not, the issue wasn't with Deck 9, the issue wasn't with OtherSide, it is perhaps all these studios, and you see these symptoms like crunch. I mean, even a Naughty Dog, this huge studio known for this prestige, it has crunch. There was another big expose about the conditions at Naughty Dog, and it's Rockstar. It's this mismanagement is not just these. Would it be incorrect to say like AA, as opposed to, if we're counting AAA as like Naughty Dog and Rockstar, or it's not just at AA or AAA, or apparently if you're Ubisoft, quadruple A now. Like no one is safe. Skull and Bones, game of the year, right? First quadruple A.
No, I think I literally just like watched a video explaining what quadruple A was supposed to be, and they were just like, well, yeah, I actually came from like debt rating and stuff like that. It was like a financial term, which is very interesting to me, which makes sense given that I watched The Big Short. They actually kind of go through that. I was just like, I never made that connection.
Okay, I should rewatch Big Short with that in mind.
I know, but I do think like quadruple A. I do think quadruple A is just made up. They're just like,
It's
like every time they go to like, there's a new Super Saiyan beyond, like every time.
But he is purple hair now. He's pink hair. Quadruple A is the new Super Saiyan 4.
Absolutely. Actually, one more thing about the economy.
Go for it.
If I could take a crack at it, something that really became apparent to me at Vicarious Visions was that when we were on QA, I talked with people who were there, and they had actually been there before as testers, and they had basically said, they'll like bring you on for a contract, and if you don't get like converted to full time, whether that's full time QA or like moving into design, like you're just gone, because they're owned by Activision. Like no Activision place will hire you back for like a 3-month or a 6-month period or something like that, and that's usually just to try and keep their nose clean in terms of like contract law, even though they're flagrantly violating it in other ways. But the thing is that I've been through people who have been there through multiple cycles like this, and they said, there was always this sort of Damocles to get to design, because they're like, well, if you go through 3 cycles at Vicarious Visions or any other Activision place, like they just stop hiring you, like they won't bring you back. And so the difficult thing is that like I was talking about like a skeleton crew of permanent QA that was there. Basically, I think what they were trying to do is cut down their operating costs, like in between all of the periods where they actually had to invest in QA and like have people like actually like hit the game pretty hard in terms of bug searches. And just one of the ways that they do that is like taking up contracts labor. And the thing is that I remember reading an article a few years ago about like that starting to seep into design and programming and art and audio, and this sort of creeping point is I've heard the term around of just like everything's moving to contract labor, and I guess what with like Uber and DoorDash and all of that, like
the gig economy,
like, gig work and stuff like that. This regrettably might be a shift to that, like a big shift to that, because sucks, because I know that people have been talking about like Silicon Valley workers for a while, just being like, that's like the one place that has been for a while one of the last few places where you could actually like get a good job with decent pay and live in the city and be able to afford all your bills and all of that. And of course they were, enticing people with a lot of like perks in the office, like, unlimited coffee and massages and a fucking ball pit or whatever. And obviously we also have this backdrop more widely of media layoffs and tech layoffs. Like this stuff is happening not just at Microsoft Studios but at Microsoft itself.
Right.
This is happening at Google, this is happening at Amazon. Regrettably, I think that is sort of the way of like making people a bit more desperate. It's like a supply and demand thing of just like, if you have more supply of people who will take this job, the price goes down. And so I think this is a way of them sort of correcting for that and not wanting to offer like, 6-figure salaries anymore. And again, like I was never getting paid that much anyways. But like I was saying with my taxes, my adjusted gross income, even though on paper I was getting paid more, I still ended up with about the same amount. Like it's a treadmill basically.
Right.
So I think that this might be an attempt at that, regrettably,
to gig economy eyes, to create a gig economy out of the games industry.
Yeah.
What do you again, neither of us is the most insanely versed in economics, but what do you think long-term or wider implications that might have? Because looking at something like Uber, a gig economy for rideshare, It didn't necessarily put taxi businesses out of work, but it certainly made a noticeable impact in them for a long time. I'm sure in bigger metropolitan areas you still have that competition a little bit, but I know communities where their regular taxi services don't exist anymore because of Uber, of Lyft, of all these places. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's necessarily something like that could happen within the games industry or tech at large?
That's interesting because obviously I think like a CEO ordering up like 5 programmers through an app is not necessarily going to happen. Like it's not going to get that fully fledged, I would say. I mean, obviously we've already had like a lot of people who are doing like freelance stuff. You're right. That might become more of the new norm of just like we are only taking freelancers for this position or something like that. And the company's trying to push that more. And because of that, I think that there's going to be like a smaller nucleus of full-timers like in the studios. And that similar to like QA and the rest of the departments, that might also cause a social divide internal to those departments as well. I was just like, well, I'm the full-timer designer and you're like a freelancer. Yeah, that might end up going that way, regrettably.
Yeah, taking a divide that's already there and just kind of multiplying it, which I'm sure
stretching
is great.
It out over,
yeah, I'm sure it's great and healthy for everyone involved.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Well, Jared, any last kind of thoughts about any of the topics thus far before we kind of get into the end state here?
No, I think that's about it, more or less. You know, I love leaving on a positive note, you know.
We could make it an actual positive note.
Yeah.
What is good? What is happening? Are you playing any good games?
Playing any good games? I alluded this to you at the very beginning, but like too much RuneScape right now. I'm a dingus. I got off of Twitter at the very beginning of 2023, and I was just telling myself I'm going to use so much of this time that I'm just wasting on social media on like Albino Lullaby and like my own game, which incidentally was inspired by being laid off. Oh God, I gotta tell you, I mean, I love Pathologic 2. It's my favorite game of all time. It literally came out the month before I got laid off from OtherSide. And so then I was just playing this game about like picking through the trash and like not having enough money to buy food and while I was unemployed. Which was a perfect time.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So no, yeah, RuneScape right now. Like, yeah, RuneScape ate up all the time that I thought I was going to devote to, like, actually doing something productive.
The mentality I've tried to take since 2023 is, like, not all time has to be productive, but you should try and make all time fulfilling. And so if you've recognized that, like, Twitter is not fulfilling, just doom scrolling or whatever that looks like, if you're getting fulfillment from RuneScape, then power to you. It doesn't have to be, like, the most immediately productive task, but if you're still getting something good out of it.
Yeah, you know, instead of scrolling Twitter, I could be fighting Commander Zilliana in the God Wars dungeon. Sorry, that's a deep cut. Yeah. Other than that, I've been trying to get Deus Ex Mankind Divided off of my list of shame. I've actually pushed through that. I think I'm getting close to the end. Shit's going down. It feels like it's getting close to the end. No, and of course, you know, given that, also very sad, the news about Eidos, because that was definitely a place where I was like, man, I would love to end up there and work on a Deus Ex game. And Lord knows there were a lot of people who were on that team who felt the exact same way, and they got a bite of the apple before it got taken away from them. And I feel for them so much.
Right. Jared, is there anything that you want to plug? I know you said you're not on Twitter, but if you're looking to know more about Jared, do you have any specific projects you've worked on that you'd like to point people towards, or anything at all? A good book you read last week, you know?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I did just finish Blood Meridian. I don't know if that's for everyone though.
McCarthy, yeah. Pretty dense.
No, I mean, it's not even that. It's just
Right.
like a really depressing book. Projects that I've worked on. I mean, well, we are finishing up Albino Lullaby episode 2. We're getting pretty close with that. Episode 1 literally shipped in 2015, so yes, it's been about 9 years. We know. So yeah, I guess keep an eye out for that coming up.
All right, for sure. I just wanted to take this opportunity to plug nothing of mine. An important disclaimer I want to give for this show is there's no way to financially support Played Off as a concept. You know, if you are enjoying the work and you want to, you know, get in touch somehow with Jared or any of the other people who will be doing interviews here, support them. Don't support me. You know, it would suck to make a single cent off of this, but I do want to plug the games industry job hunt Slack channel. It's been floating around Twitter, and I'll put a link into this video's description as well. They're a community focusing on providing job hunting resources to those impacted by a layoff or reduction in workforce within the games industry. I'm not directly affiliated with them. I'm just shooting them a plug because they seem like a good place to turn to with what is happening. That about covers it for me. Jared, any last parting thoughts, words of wisdom?
I feel woefully underprepared for this. But like we said, it's rough out there, guys. I don't know. Be kind to each other. You know what? Actually, you know what? I have a good closer.
All right, hit it.
When I got flown out for that ZeniMax online interview, they flew me into Baltimore, and then they had a driver come pick me up because they're out in Rockville, I believe it is. And this was a guy named Kola, Kola. But he was talking to me about like the conditions of getting laid off from OtherSide and all of that. And, you know, he was talking to me about like his very long career. Like he was a computer programmer and then retired, and he'd been just driving ever since. And I thought it was really cool. And he started asking me about like, you know, when I got laid off, he's just like, did your coworkers, did they like offer to pay you your phone bill? And I said, no. And he's like, did they offer to pay for your groceries? I said, no. He's like, did they offer to help pay your rent? I said, no. And he told me, you need better friends. And I can say, at the very least, like since getting laid off and hired at a new place, like I've done my best to like try and give money, you know, particularly to the people I know directly, but just like in general, just like to help people through. So I would say, be that better friend.
I think that's as beautiful and wise a place as we could leave off as any. All right, well, this has been Played Off. I've been Perry Gottschalk. This has been Jared Mitchell on that side of the screen. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.